The Inquisition was born not in a single moment, but in a slow and careful convergence of necessity, paranoia, and survival. The earliest ideological roots can be traced back to the closing years of the Great Crusade. It was during this climactic era, particularly following the events of the Horus Heresy and the Siege of Terror, that the need for a covert agency of internal enforcement was no longer just a matter of foresight, but one of immediate demand. The Emperor of Mankind, after being mortally wounded by Horus and interred into the Golden Throne, had left behind a fractured and bleeding Imperium. It was in this vacuum of divine leadership that Malcador the Sigillite, his most trusted regent, laid the foundation for what would become the Inquisition. Malcador, in the final days of his life, summoned a small group of individuals he deemed incorruptible, possessing a blend of intellectual rigour, moral clarity, and unwavering loyalty to the Emperor's true vision. These first proto-Inquisitors were not warriors or generals, but individuals of unshakable will and investigative instinct. Their purpose was not only to root out treason, but to ensure the Imperium's ideological purity, to prevent future threats before they could bloom, and to remain unbound by the bureaucratic and dogmatic constraints of the Adeptus Terra. They would become answerable to no one but themselves, empowered to judge the worth of any man, woman, or even godlike being if it served the Emperor's unseen will. This foundational group was never publicly named. Some of their identities have been lost or suppressed. Others are speculated to have returned to anonymity, continuing their work in the shadows even as the Imperium entered a new age. What is known with certainty is that the Inquisition's true establishment did not occur in full until centuries later, in the early stages of the Scouring and the following reformation of the Imperium. In that era, the Emperor's teachings were fractured, and numerous cults vied for dominance in shaping the new state religion. Heresy flourished not only in the hearts of rebels and traitors, but within the ranks of humanity's defenders. This chaotic context made the creation of a sanctioned organisation, operating outside all chains of command, not only acceptable, but essential. Biologically, Inquisitors are baseline humans, though this simplicity belies a staggering degree of diversity. There is no fixed genotype or phenotype associated with the Inquisition. Members can range widely in age, height, origin, and appearance. The organisation has no requirement for genetic enhancement, and its strength lies in its ability to adapt and evolve. Some Inquisitors are born into noble void-faring dynasties, others claw their way up from the squalor of underhives. Some are Psykers, trained under the Scholastica Sicana, while others rely solely on physical discipline and analytic prowess. Height varies from the average 170 to 200 centimetres. Their weight, musculature, and physical presence depend largely on personal upbringing and specialisation, not on standard military requirements. Psychologically, however, all Inquisitors share a crucial trait: total conviction. This is not to say all are fanatics. Many are cold rationalists, deeply aware of the cost of their work. Others are zealous in a way that borders on madness. Regardless of method, the defining factor is their belief in the righteousness of their judgment, and their willingness to carry it out, even if that means executing entire populations or purging entire planetary sectors. The military doctrine of the Inquisition is unconventional. It is a force that thrives in asymmetry. Inquisitors rarely lead massed armies, although they can requisition them if necessary. Instead, they operate through influence, infiltration, and surgical application of force. Each Inquisitor acts independently, often accompanied by a retinue tailored to their mission. These warbands can include anything from sanctioned Psykers, former assassins of the Officio Assassinorum, rogue traders, tech adepts, Astartes outcasts, to even Xenos allies under radical interpretation of Imperial law. The war gear used by Inquisitors is similarly eclectic. Plasma pistols, digital weapons, demon hammers, archeotech blades, and psi-circuitry implants are all common, depending on the agent's approach to warfare. Recruitment is handled directly by active Inquisitors. There is no academy or formal training ground for the Inquisition. Individuals are typically selected based on observed merit, ideological compatibility, or unique skill sets. The training that follows is grueling and intimate. A candidate may spend years, even decades, as an acolyte or interrogator under a senior Inquisitor, undergoing tests of loyalty, faith, reasoning, and combat. When deemed worthy, or when a master is slain, an acolyte may be elevated to full inquisitorial rank. The cultural ethos of the Inquisition is defined by secrecy and autonomy. Its agents are conditioned to expect betrayal from within and without. Trust is a rare commodity, and even within the ranks of the Inquisition, agents may plot against one another if their goals diverge. This internal tension has led to the formation of sub-factions, known as Ordos, which represent major spheres of focus. The most prominent are the Ordo Hereticus, focused on rooting out corruption and heresy, the Ordo Xenos, which monitors and counteracts alien threats, and the Ordo Malleus, which confronts demonic incursions and warp-related phenomena. Each Ordo operates independently, though coordination exists during apocalyptic crises or overlapping investigations. Beyond the three primary Ordos, numerous lesser factions exist. The Ordo Sicarius investigates abuses within the Officio Assassinorum. The Ordo Machinum monitors the Adeptus Mechanicus. The Ordo Chronos, largely theoretical and surrounded by rumour, is said to deal with temporal anomalies. Each of these groups reflects the hyper-specialisation of the Inquisition and its tendency to spawn splinter ideologies. Technology within the Inquisition is rarely mass-produced. Most Inquisitors employ relic-grade or custom-crafted devices. These tools often defy Adeptus Mechanicus standards, either due to their Xenos origin, forbidden design, or unique functional purpose. Servo skulls bearing surveillance implants, neural scanners, disintegration fields, and warp-dampening fields are all known to be in use. Cybernetics are common among field agents, especially those who engage in direct combat or infiltration. The Inquisition's philosophical stance toward technology is pragmatic. Unlike the Adeptus Mechanicus, who venerate machines as sacred, the Inquisition evaluates tech solely by its utility and threat level. Dangerous tools are not shunned, but isolated and studied with usage decided on a case-by-case basis. Famous individuals within the Inquisition have varied in method and notoriety. Inquisitor Kryptman was infamous for his ruthless Xenos containment tactics, including the genocidal sterilization of entire planets to deny the Tyranids biomass. Inquisitor Eisenhorn began his career as a strict Puritan, but slowly adopted radical methods, forming alliances with unsanctioned Psykers and even demonic tools in pursuit of greater goals. His eventual fall, transformation and disappearance remain controversial among Inquisition records. Inquisitor Corteas, known for his motto "Burn the heretic, kill the mutant, purge the unclean," is emblematic of the hardline Ordo Hereticus. Inquisitor Greyfax represents a more recent resurgence of militant purity, forged in the fires of the Indomitus Crusade. Inquisitorial war machines are rare but devastating. Valkyrie gunships modified for stealth, teleportation beacons linked to strike teams, and even command over Imperial knights under extreme conditions have been documented. Some Inquisitors are known to ride into battle accompanied by penitent engines, archoflagellants, or Deathwatch kill teams. Each deployment is tailored to the mission's nature, never according to a standard battlefield template. Despite the variety of personalities and factions, most Inquisitors follow several shared behavioural instincts. They operate alone or in trusted cells. They are suspicious of all centralised power except their own. They intervene only when absolutely necessary, often allowing events to play out before revealing themselves. They manipulate the Astra Militarum, Adeptus Astartes, and local planetary governments with veiled threats and carefully planted influence. Their authority is such that a single Inquisitor may overrule a planetary governor, detain a space marine, or order the exterminatus of an entire world if the circumstances demand it. Rituals and ethics vary. Some Inquisitors maintain shrines to the Emperor and consult astropathic oracles. Others maintain sterile environments devoid of religious iconography, approaching their duties as a mathematical certainty. Internally, caste divisions exist not in rank, but in ideology. Radicals and Puritans often engage in shadow wars, sabotaging each other's investigations or using political pressure to discredit rivals. Despite these conflicts, there is an unspoken rule that open civil war between Inquisitors is forbidden, though this rule has been broken on more than one occasion. The Inquisition is not a monolithic hand of judgment. It is 1,000 minds, bound by a shared mandate but divided in execution. It exists not to protect humanity from external enemies alone, but from itself, its ignorance, ambition, and tendency to forget that the greatest threats often wear a human face. Inquisitorial operations are fundamentally decentralized, not only in terms of authority but also in infrastructure. There is no central fortress monastery or command headquarters akin to the Adeptus Astartes. Instead, each Inquisitor functions as a fully autonomous operative, equipped with near-limitless authority granted by the Emperor's mandate. The assumption is that the Inquisitor's judgment, experience and insight justify their independence. However, this independence is not without oversight. Senior Inquisitors often observe, test or quietly censure their peers through veiled pressure, political manoeuvring, or carefully managed reputational destruction. In extreme cases, rogue Inquisitors are hunted by others in what is known as a reclamation warrant. Despite the lack of a centralized base, there are secure locations scattered across the Imperium known as conclaves, strongholds used for temporary operations, resource acquisition, or emergency coordination. These sites are often disguised, hidden deep within hive cities, asteroids, or forgotten orbital platforms. Each conclave typically serves one of the major ordos, though neutral zones do exist. Conclaves host records, containment chambers, training environments, and vaults holding forbidden technology, Xenos artifacts, or captured demonic entities under heavily warded stasis. Access to these sites is tightly controlled, and even among Inquisitors, clearance can be denied without explanation. The composition of inquisitorial retinues varies widely and reflects the Inquisitor's methods, personality, and past experiences. An Ordo Hereticus Puritan might assemble a team of flagellant enforcers, exorcists, and data scribes, while a radical from the Ordo Xenos may travel with a sanctioned elder outcast, a modified Necron servitor, or a linguist raised in a genestealer cult. These entourages are not merely for combat. They serve roles ranging from cultural infiltration to warp anomaly analysis. Psykers are a common presence, often leashed through electropsychic control devices or monitored by blank operatives, individuals with the rare pariah gene that negates warp presence. The diversity of these retinues is so extreme that Imperial commanders are often uncertain whether to salute, kneel, or evacuate when an Inquisitor arrives. The personal ships of Inquisitors are likewise unique. They range from heavily modified strike cruisers to stealth-enabled light frigates with warp cloaking devices prohibited under Imperial law. Some operate ancient vessels older than the Imperium itself, housing hidden machine spirits and unknown internal geometries. These ships often contain data crypts, containment vaults, reliquary chambers, and teleportation systems linked directly to planetary relay stations. Some even maintain private astropathic choirs for secure interstellar communication, independent of the standard Imperial networks. Among the civilian population, the Inquisition is often mythologized more than understood. To most Imperial citizens, they are whispers, a shadow that arrives, purges, and vanishes. Those who witness an Inquisitor in person are usually dead soon after, or conscripted into servitude. Their reputation is shaped more by fear than clarity. This deliberate mystique serves a tactical purpose. Fear of the Inquisition deters heresy more effectively than any preacher's sermon. The very rumour of an Inquisitor's presence can dissolve cults, provoke planetary governors to self-audit, and send administratum scribes into panicked confession. In the military chain of command, an Inquisitor's authority is absolute and unchallengeable. They may assume control over a planetary defence force, requisition space marine assistance, or halt an ongoing crusade. However, their influence is wielded carefully. Inquisitors typically avoid disrupting major campaigns unless the risk of internal contamination outweighs the military objective. For instance, should a daemonic entity be identified in the heart of a victorious army, an Inquisitor may quarantine the entire division and order orbital sterilization, even at the cost of an ongoing siege. Their judgment is final, and the cost of questioning it is often extermination. In the military chain of command, an Inquisitor's authority is absolute and unchallengeable. They may assume control over a planetary defence force, requisition space marine assistance, or halt an ongoing crusade. However, their influence is wielded carefully. Inquisitors typically avoid disrupting major campaigns unless the risk of internal contamination outweighs the military objective. For instance, should a daemonic entity be identified in the heart of a victorious army, an Inquisitor may quarantine the entire division and order orbital sterilization, even at the cost of an ongoing siege. Their judgment is final, and the cost of questioning it is often extermination. Despite their feared authority, many Inquisitors understand the strategic value of restraint. They often act through intermediaries, false identities, or staged public appearances to conceal their hand. Only when necessary do they reveal their full rank, brandishing their rosette, a seal that grants them immediate power over all branches of the Imperium. The rosette itself is more than a symbol. Many are encoded with genetic, psychic, or cogitator lock security protocols, and some act as summoning devices, weapon triggers, or kill switches for local surveillance systems. A critical component of inquisitorial identity is the belief in the ultimate fragility of mankind. Unlike the ecclesiarchy, which preaches humanity's divine destiny, the Inquisition sees humanity as a species on the edge of extinction. Beset on all sides by ancient Xenos empires, internal decay, and the predations of the warp, their culture is one of vigilance, not triumph. They are less concerned with winning wars and more focused on ensuring that humanity survives long enough to continue fighting them. This worldview places them in philosophical opposition to other branches of the Imperium, especially those who mistake order for stability or faith for control. The Inquisition's relationship with other imperial institutions is complex. With the Adeptus Mechanicus, the connection is pragmatic. The Ordo Malleus and certain tech priests have long cooperated in the development of demonic containment protocols, nullification fields, and warp analysis technology. However, radical Inquisitors often trespass on sacred technological ground, seizing forbidden machines, conducting hair-tech research, or destroying SDCs deemed too dangerous. These acts provoke cold hostility from Mars, but the Inquisition's legal immunity makes direct reprisal impossible. Officially. Unofficially, several Inquisitors have vanished after prying too deeply into Mechanicus vaults. With the Adeptus Astartes, the relationship is strained but functional. Many chapters respect the Inquisition, particularly those with close ties to the Ordo Xenos or Ordo Malleus, such as the Grey Knights and Death Watch. However, some chapters regard Inquisitors as manipulators or moral hypocrites. Conflicts have erupted when Inquisitors attempted to judge a chapter's actions, especially concerning gene-seed purity or civilian collateral. The Space Wolves are infamous for their open defiance of inquisitorial authority, particularly after the events of the First War for Armageddon. Despite these tensions, Astartes often comply with inquisitorial orders when the threat level is extreme, particularly against Chaos incursions or Necron awakenings. Perhaps the Inquisition's most controversial interactions are with the Ecclesiarchy and the Sororitas. The Order Hereticus, which emerged primarily to police heretical cults and rogue Psykers, was also tasked with monitoring the Ecclesiarchy itself. This duality, defending faith while watching its leaders, has created ideological dissonance. The Inquisition tolerates the Ecclesiarchy's excesses as long as they do not endanger imperial unity. When faith becomes fanaticism that undermines the Imperium's cohesion, Inquisitors act without mercy. That said, many Inquisitors are devout themselves, interpreting their authority as a sacred duty. Hierarchy within the Inquisition is unofficial and based on reputation, age, and influence rather than rank. There are no formal promotions. Inquisitors gain status through decades of successful investigation, management of conclaves, authorship of key doctrine, or survival through high-profile crises. The informal title of Lord Inquisitor is reserved for those who lead conclaves or coordinate major operations, such as system-wide purges or joint campaigns with the Grey Knights. Some lords chair regional Ordo synods, but their authority remains advisory. Each Inquisitor ultimately remains a sovereign agent. Within internal culture, the split between radicals and Puritans represents the greatest point of division. Puritans maintain strict adherence to imperial dogma and oppose the use of Xenos technology, demonic artifacts, or unsanctioned Psykers under any circumstance. They view deviation as corruption and believe even good intentions can lead to heresy. Radicals argue that survival demands flexibility. They employ Xenos operatives, infiltrate cults, and even bind demonic entities if the alternative is worse. Some radicals become so immersed in forbidden knowledge that they are declared traitors by their peers. The line between radical and heretic is often paper-thin, and many internal purges begin from these ideological disputes. The concept of exterminatus is most closely associated with Inquisition authority. While the right to order exterminatus is shared with certain naval and Astartes commands, it is the Inquisition that most often deploys this measure. An Inquisitor may trigger a planet's destruction to contain a genestealer infestation, halt a warp breach, or eliminate a world compromised by chaos. This power is not used lightly, and most Inquisitors carry data records justifying every such act, expecting that future generations may question their decisions. Ultimately, the Inquisition exists as a paradox. It is a tool of absolute power in an empire already drowning in authoritarian excess, yet it is also the Imperium's last firewall, an entity that acknowledges no master, holds no illusions, and will destroy anything, even itself, if that is what survival demands. Inquisitors walk among the people unseen, speak with the authority of gods, and die nameless in service to a cause too terrible to be glorified. The Inquisition's technological outlook differs fundamentally from nearly every other institution within the Imperium. Where the Adeptus Mechanicus worships technology as divine and immutable, the Inquisition views it as a means to an end, a tool to be used, modified, or destroyed depending on the need. Most Inquisitors respect the Mechanicum's authority over machinery only to the extent that it remains useful. Many see the machine cult's rituals as distractions or vulnerabilities, especially when those rituals slow responses to active threats. As such, Inquisitors are often willing to bypass Mechanicus approval to seize forbidden technology, open sealed vaults, or experiment with Xenos devices if their objectives justify the risk. The devices carried by Inquisitors are not mass-produced, and few are replicated outside of personal request or artisan commission. A Puritan of the Ordo Hereticus may bear a bolter inscribed with sanctified scripture, its internal mechanisms soaked in sacred oils and calibrated to fire hexed ammunition, designed for warp entities. A radical from the Ordo Xenos might conceal a crystalline pulse weapon within a servo gauntlet, its origin traced to a collapsed TOE research cell. Others still may integrate ancient Dark Age technology, relics so old and complex even the Mechanicus dares not recreate them. Regardless of source, these tools reflect the Inquisitor's identity and operating method. Their design often favours modularity, concealment, and overwhelming single-target lethality. Psy-tech hybrids are common, especially among agents combating warp phenomena. Tools like psychic amplifiers, null auras, dimensional anchors, and soul-binding wards are not only sanctioned, but expected in demonic counter-operations. Inquisitors without psychic ability themselves often travel with psycho retainers or blanks, individuals whose mere presence disrupts warp-based effects. These blanks, also called untouchables, are psychologically jarring to most humans. Their aura produces feelings of nausea, existential dread, or even violent fear. However, within the Inquisition, their utility in nullifying sorcery and demonic manifestations outweighs all social discomfort. Some Inquisitors maintain private vaults known as black cells, sealed archives holding items too dangerous to destroy yet too important to ignore. These may include demon weapons bound in psychic chains, AI remnants from the Dark Age of technology, or fragments of Xenos hive minds. Access to these vaults is limited, and their locations are typically known only to the Inquisitor and perhaps a trusted cogitator overseer. Periodic purges or internal audits of these collections are common, especially after an Inquisitor's death or suspected corruption. In some cases, these vaults become contested assets, sparking brief but violent internal conflicts among rival Inquisitors. Internally, the Inquisition fosters a caste of non-inquisitorial agents referred to as the Ordo Custodians, or simply Custodes, not to be confused with the Adeptus Custodes. These individuals are archivists, stewards, or missionaries dedicated to maintaining long-term data continuity, managing secure communication between Ordos, or preserving corrupted histories for analytical comparison. While not field operatives, they often hold knowledge that even Inquisitors must request access to through encoded summons. In some cases, a custodian may be assigned as a passive observer to an Inquisitor, not to report on them directly, but to ensure that continuity of information survives should the Inquisitor be lost in hostile action or corrupted by radical extremism. Rare but influential are the Sigillites, an informal reference to Inquisitors or agents who trace their spiritual lineage or ideological model to Malcador the Sigillite himself. While there is no formal doctrine attached to the title, These individuals often adhere to a rationalist view of the Inquisition, favouring balance, restraint, and long-term strategy over brute purging. Some Sigillites operate entirely in the political domain, subtly guiding ecclesiarchy appointments, administratum reforms, or naval deployments under the guise of detached analysis. Others act as ideological anchors in multi-ordo conclaves, ensuring that actions taken under one specialization do not unintentionally destabilize another. Among the most shadowed roles in the Inquisition are the autonomous agents known only as auditors. These figures are assigned by consensus of a conclave when an Inquisitor is suspected of destabilizing behavior, heresy, or irrecoverable radicalism. An auditor does not question publicly or request compliance. They observe quietly and, if warranted, deliver judgment without warning. The death of an Inquisitor by auditor hand is rarely reported, and the position itself is denied in most official records. However, evidence of their activity appears in redacted files, sudden disappearances, and the shifting of sealed inquisitorial rosettes from one bearer to another without explanation. Cultural habits within the Inquisition vary significantly by ordo, region, and era. Some Inquisitors dress in lavish attire meant to project symbolic power, robed in layered ceramite and relic-threaded seals. Others adopt austere utilitarian gear designed to obscure their identity. Inquisitors embedded in hive worlds may maintain entire second lives under false names, infiltrating cults or criminal networks for years at a time. Others live openly aboard void stations, surrounded by a retinue of silent scribes, purity-warded servitors, and hololithic seers tasked with scanning future event probabilities. There is no standard lifestyle. Each Inquisitor shapes their environment according to their mission needs and personal philosophy. Behavioural tendencies also shift with time. Veteran Inquisitors, particularly those who have survived centuries of service, often display extreme caution bordering on paranoia. They employ multi-layered safeguards, trust no single source, and isolate themselves physically and psychically to avoid corruption. In contrast, younger Inquisitors, especially those recently elevated from interrogator status, may operate more aggressively, driven by ideological certainty and a desire to prove their judgment. This generational gap can create friction, especially when younger radicals provoke puritanical reprisal, or when veterans accuse their successors of negligence or recklessness. In times of galactic upheaval, such as during the Age of Apostasy or the rise of the Great Rift, the Inquisition often activates sleeper agents, cells embedded in key worlds or organizations, prepared to destabilize or reorganize entire systems should a crisis demand it. These agents, referred to as deep cells, are often unaware of their true affiliation until triggered by a code phrase, astropathic signal, or observed sign. Their role may be as simple as assassinating a newly promoted governor, or as complex as reactivating a relic-grade artificial intelligence to analyze warp anomalies in real time. Within Imperial law, the Inquisition holds the unique legal status of meta-authority. This means their power supersedes not only military and religious offices, but even bureaucratic command chains. Their decisions cannot be appealed, and any obstruction, intentional or not, is considered heresy by default. This authority includes requisitioning ships, weapons, personnel, or even planetary infrastructure. However, misuse of this power carries internal consequences. Inquisitors who abuse their authority recklessly often find themselves politically isolated, with resources denied or operations obstructed by peers through indirect means. Despite the seemingly limitless power of the Inquisition, its greatest weapon remains information. Inquisitors are trained not only in investigation and rhetoric, but also in data crafting, code breaking, and cognitive warfare. Many maintain private lex mechanics, memory palaces, and encrypted knowledge spheres to process, catalogue, and simulate outcomes. It is not uncommon for a high-level Inquisitor to spend years tracing the implications of a single intercepted transmission, ultimately concluding that a minor cult's actions could lead to galactic-scale destabilization 50 years later. It is this long-view capability that distinguishes the Inquisition from other branches of imperial governance. Where others act in reaction, the Inquisition acts in prevention, even if that prevention involves erasing entire bloodlines or rewriting historical records. Even the act of declaring one's inquisitorial status is a calculated event. Many Inquisitors operate for months or years without ever revealing their identity, instead assuming fabricated identities ranging from administratum auditors to rogue traders. The sudden presentation of the inquisitorial rosette, whether in a tense council of generals, a heretic's laboratory, or a hive lord's banquet, has an immediate and chilling effect. It is a symbol not of hope, but of finality, an indication that all other avenues have failed and the final judge has arrived. While the Inquisition is not immune to error, it is designed to correct its own missteps through internal conflict. Radical and Puritan, young and old, Psyker and blank, each serves as a counterbalance to the other. It is an institution that not only tolerates internal disagreement, but depends on it for long-term survivability. The Imperium does not need a perfect Inquisition. It needs one that survives, adapts, and remains terrifying enough to keep humanity's enemies, internal or external, unsure of where the next judgment will come from. In the final assessment, the Inquisition is not a bastion of justice. It is a mechanism of survival, designed by desperate hands in the darkest hour of mankind's history. It endures not because it is righteous, but because it is effective, and as the galaxy falls deeper into madness, its shadow grows longer, colder, and more necessary than ever before. The earliest surviving official records pertaining to inquisitorial activity appear in the sealed vaults of the Adeptus Administratum's Lexicon Division in the Segmentum Solar. These entries are cross-indexed under interdepartmental enforcement mandates, non-hierarchical autonomous agents, a designation deliberately obscure. The first verifiable appearance of inquisitorial authority in Administratum archives occurs in the year 133 of the 31st millennium. The source document refers to a Sigillite-mandated autonomous censure body, operating under the direct authorization of the Senatorum Imperialis, and bearing a physical writ signed by Malcador the Sigillite himself. The entry was sealed under level Primaris security and revised 3 times by unknown scribes between the 32nd and 34th millennia. The Adeptus Administratum, as the backbone of imperial governance, quickly recognized the Inquisition's legal and procedural anomalies. Inquisitors required no permissions, no approvals, and didn't operate within the segmented chain of command that governed all other branches of the Imperium. They bypassed data silos, appropriated restricted intelligence files, and operated entirely outside the protocols that defined the Administratum's bureaucratic culture. This made them, from the outset, both a threat and a necessity. The Administratum adapted by creating sealed communication links known as exemption conduits. These data streams were reserved for inquisitorial use only, and bypassed local sector-level encryption. Once activated, Administratum scribes were forbidden from reviewing or altering any data within the stream under penalty of immediate censure or memory scrubbing. The first widespread documentation of inquisitorial intervention within imperial governance occurred during the Segmentum Pacificus Reformation campaign in the 32nd millennium. Administratum ledgers note the sudden disappearance of over 900,000 individual records across 400 worlds. When queried, the overseeing sector inquisitor submitted a single document, an 8-line missive stating that the affected individuals had been non-viable elements under suspicion of communicative deviation consistent with pre-heresy schismatic doctrine. No appeals were filed. The local planetary governors received notice that the missing names were to be treated as if they had never existed. The Mechanicus first formally acknowledged the Inquisition in the 34th millennium during a classified interaction on the Forge world of Damas Prime. Data recovered from a corrupted Martian archive, later reconstructed by Ordo Machinum technoscribes, records the arrival of an Inquisitor of the Ordo Malleus, accompanied by an artificial intelligence sealed within a black adamantium sarcophagus. The AI, allegedly predating the Horus Heresy, had been discovered in a long-dead Dark Age bunker beneath the equatorial trench of Beta Rho Station. The Inquisitor demanded immediate access to Mechanicus facilities, including access to red-level data altars and nullfield containment zones. The Archmagos initially refused, invoking the Omnissiah's Edict of Forbidden Interface. 6 hours later, the Archmagos was found dead, his neural cortex seared, and the Inquisitor had assumed temporary control of the Forge. Following the incident, Damas Prime entered a state of partial schism and was later downgraded to a class for resource node under Mechanicus review. These types of engagements became more frequent during the Age of Apostasy. The High Lords of Terror, weakened by decades of religious and political infighting, relied on the Inquisition as both investigative body and enforcement mechanism. During this period, the Administratum's own records were compromised, censored, and in some cases deliberately falsified. Key Inquisitors operating under the Ordo Hereticus, founded officially in the 36th millennium, began targeting high-ranking ecclesiarchal officials, citing corruption, heretical excess, and the abuse of doctrine. One notable case is the disjunction of Helicar Primus, in which Inquisitor Barth Ilian ordered the immediate execution of the entire planetary priesthood, following a 6-month audit of doctrinal deviations. Administratum archives note that the Helicar Shrine world had rewritten over 1,000 liturgical codes, introducing non-imperial saints, including a pre-imperial deity identified only as the Gilded Path. Post-operation reviews marked the event as justified, but cautioned against the Inquisition's use of orbital strikes within shrine districts. The Mechanicus, during the same era, found themselves both allies and targets of inquisitorial scrutiny. The Ordo Machinum, a lesser-known but sanctioned branch of the Inquisition, was formed to investigate technology use, hoarding, and non-imperial innovation within the Forge worlds. The Mechanicus tolerated this branch only because it often worked with loyal tech priests to eliminate renegade magi, heretics, and unauthorized Xenos tech research. However, when the Inquisition began seizing standard template constructs from sealed vaults on Narcissus Forge and Paragon Theta, tensions escalated. Mechanicus archives, preserved under cipher lock by tech adept Vontis Grem, record that over 300 Skitari were killed in a 7-day conflict with inquisitorial retinues. The outcome was a rare ceasefire agreement in which the STC fragments were divided, with the Mechanicus permitted to retain blueprints while the Inquisition removed all physical remnants and research logs. Throughout the 37th and 38th millennia, the Administratum shifted toward indirect compliance with inquisitorial activity. While individual scribes and bureaucrats often resisted, high-level prefects began developing protocols to accommodate sudden inquisitorial intervention. These included administrative vacuums, sections of planetary sector or segmentum command, left deliberately unfilled so that inquisitors could assume direct authority without triggering bureaucratic paralysis. In exchange, the Administratum received immunity from investigation during joint operations, unless specific charges of heresy or sabotage were proven beyond subjective doubt. This arrangement became unofficial policy on over 70% of worlds within the segmentum obscurus. Mechanicus Inquisition interactions remained far more volatile. One of the most documented cases occurred on Forge World Duro Varnak in the early 39th millennium. An Inquisitor of the Ordo Xenos obtained evidence that a sect of magibiologists had captured and dissected a live Kroot hunting pack. The research facility, codenamed Vault Ganymede, had not only extracted and catalogued the Xenos' adaptive genetic structures, but had also begun testing gene splice applications on human labour populations. When the Inquisitor attempted to initiate a planetary shutdown, Duro Varnak's defence grid targeted their ship. The result was a 4-week engagement involving Deathwatch kill teams, cybernetic plague outbreaks, and the subsequent sterilisation of 3 adjacent manufactorum districts. Both factions filed redacted after-action reports. Duro Varnak was reclassified as Mechanicus Black Zone 7, and the Inquisitor involved was never seen again. By the dawn of the 40th millennium, the Inquisition had embedded itself so deeply into the structures of both the Administratum and the Mechanicus that new documentation protocols were created. Administratum agents began issuing Aegis Codex tags, unique identifiers attached to events or locations where inquisitorial involvement had occurred but could not be publicly acknowledged. These tags appear in thousands of ledgers and sector reports across the Imperium. One example, noted in the Calexis sector audit, simply reads, Aegis Red, further data restricted per throne right intervention. Even Lord Sector commanders were forbidden to inquire further under pain of execution. Meanwhile, the Mechanicus began developing counter-influence protocols. Some Forge worlds initiated their own hidden archives, the so-called obliquity repositories. These were constructed in deep subterranean networks and locked by tripartite data rights, requiring a tech priest Dominus, an Inquisitor's rosette, and a Noosphere seal simultaneously to access. Their purpose was to track inquisitorial seizures of technological artifacts and to ensure that knowledge critical to Mars's sovereignty was not permanently removed from Mechanicus' reach. Very few Inquisitors ever discovered these repositories, and fewer still understood their scale. The Administratum's role during the Noctis Eterna, the period following the opening of the Great Rift, was especially significant. With galaxy-wide communications shattered, many planetary governors fell back on inquisitorial edicts as a source of unbroken authority. The Inquisition issued emergency declarations known as Lex Finalis mandates, authorizing the seizure of resources, reassignment of military personnel, and suspension of ecclesiastical rights deemed a threat to morale or warp stability. These mandates were carried by envoys and astropathic packets bearing triple-sealed authenticity codes, which even Adeptus Mechanicus encryption could not replicate without detection. In this era, the Inquisition functioned not only as a stabilizer, but in many sectors as the de facto command structure of the Imperium. In the records of the Adeptus Administratum, the earliest officially sanctioned full-scale military operation involving the Inquisition appears in the audit logs of the Garanthine Schism, dated to the 38th millennium. The schism began as a bureaucratic revolt on the cardinal world of Garanth Minor. What initially appeared to be a local administrative uprising against ecclesiastical tithes quickly escalated into a planet-wide insurrection with signs of deeper corruption. Administratum auditors flagged inconsistencies in shipment logs, unexplained energy fluxes in shrine districts, and a pattern of vanishing Prometheum convoys. When an Ordo Hereticus Inquisitor named Valjean Rourke arrived, he identified not simple rebellion, but a theosophical cult embedded within the ecclesiastical hierarchy. Over 100 canonesses, 6 archdeacons and the planetary confessor were implicated in the ritualistic repurposing of tithes to maintain a false imperial saint known as the Infinite Herald. This construct was found to be a warp-tainted relic, suspected of minor demonic resonance. The Inquisition's action was immediate and absolute. Rourke ordered a planetary silencing operation. Mechanicus macrocogitators registered over 1,000 orbital lance strikes across major population centres within the first 4 hours. Administratum reports state that over 12 million individuals were executed under mass heresy classification. Secondary Mechanicus confirmation logs, verified through stasis core black box records, report the use of exterminatus-grade viral bombs in at least 2 of Garanth Minor's hive sectors. Following the purge, Rourke's Ordo Hereticus division submitted a one-line report to Terra. Infection removed, no vector remains. The Administratum filed the incident as a Category 4V world correction, and the Mechanicus downgraded the world to quarantine status. It was later reseeded using cloned surf stock 5 centuries later. During the Carpathian anomaly, recorded in the early 40th millennium, the Adeptus Mechanicus requested assistance from the Ordo Malleus after detecting anomalous warp radiation near the Deep Space Listening Array known as Array Phi 7. The Mechanicus had lost contact with 6 exploratory auger satellites in orbit around a collapsed microstar in the region. In response, Inquisitor Achilleus Mar of the Ordo Malleus deployed to investigate alongside a detachment of Grey Knights. What they discovered was logged cryptically in both Administratum and Mechanicus records. Array Phi 7 had become an accidental beacon, drawing in a warp entity of uncertain classification. Witnesses described a sphere of gravitational nullification enveloping the station, with organic metallic appendages manifesting in irregular time intervals. Mechanicus survivors reported temporal displacement and psychic hallucinations, most prominently the sound of mechanical prayers in reversed binary. Mars forces enacted Protocol Apocryphon, sterilizing the structure using a matter inversion warhead. The Mechanicus recorded the site as technologically unviable, and Administratum records were sealed under the Lex Obscura designation. The Inquisition classified the event as a Class Delta incursion with non-repeatable causality. Phi 7 was removed from star charts shortly after. In the revision of Grellan Septimus, an Administratum-led logistics hub in the Segmentum Tempestus, inquisitorial intervention prevented a catastrophic collapse in Imperial provisioning. The planet was essential to warp route coordination for over 30 systems, yet had been showing statistical anomalies in fuel efficiency and transit losses for over a century. When Administratum clerks failed to locate the cause, Inquisitor Helm Abgrin of the Ordo Xenos deployed a clandestine audit team. The team uncovered that a minor Xenos species, later classified as non-sentient mimetic parasitic entities, had infiltrated the station via contaminated data slate shipments. These Xenos parasites thrived in neuroelectrical fields, embedding themselves in the brains of low-level scribe servitors. Once embedded, they altered perception in subtle but increasingly harmful ways. Entire branches of the Logistics Administration had been operating on false data for years, assuming accuracy even as miscalculations cascaded into fuel shortages, overestimated deliveries, and fleet delay. The Inquisition purged over 10,000 Administratum personnel and purged all cogitator systems with virus script incendiaries. Grellan Septimus was briefly shut down, its systems rebuilt under Mechanicus oversight using blank core data engines. In response, the Administratum issued its first multi-sector memo encouraging random rescreening of cogitator-trained personnel every 50 solar years. The Ordo Xenos classified the species as category mimetic null threat and banned further study. Perhaps the most significant cooperation between the Inquisition and the Adeptus Mechanicus occurred during the Vaults of Talassar incident, recorded in mid-41st millennium. Talassar Forge was a Mechanicus outpost specializing in experimental void mining drills and warp core extraction rigs. Unbeknownst to its fabricator general, a research faction within the Forge had begun studying the intersection of warp fields and crystalline gravitational harmonics, an unstable synthesis forbidden by both Martian dogma and inquisitorial decree. The project, codenamed Echolight, created a controlled warp echo within a crystallized stasis matrix. This matrix became self-aware. By the time an Ordo Malleus team under Inquisitor Valka Mor arrived, 34 tech priests had been neural merged into the matrix. Their minds no longer had physical bodies, and the matrix refused to release them. It had begun replicating segments of their personalities, forming a digital psionic collective. Amor classified the entity as an emergent warp construct, non-daemonic, but no longer considered alive in any conventional sense. A joint Mechanicus Inquisition tribunal ordered the vaults sealed. Talassar Forge was downgraded and all surviving records transferred to Mars under locked protocols. To this day, the Talassar anomaly remains unclassified within open Mechanicus doctrine, and its existence is known only to a few Ordo Malleus archivists. The Crescent Hallow Revolt, listed in Mechanicus field memory chains and Administratum casualty ledgers, serves as a rare example of Inquisition failure acknowledged in open records. Crescent Hallow was an industrial world where an Ordo Hereticus Inquisitor named Laurus Ezeran attempted to incite preemptive cleansing operations on suspected chaos infiltration, based solely on statistical irregularities in workforce output. The Mechanicus governor resisted, demanding full psychic confirmation and multiple verifiable reports before deployment. Ezeran bypassed all appeals and initiated orbital bombardment of 3 cities, killing over 72 million. However, after the engagement, psychic scrutiny and forensic analysis revealed no sign of chaos, heresy, or external influence. The decline in output was due to economic mismanagement and a regional outbreak of void rust in agricultural filtration systems. The Inquisition issued no apology, and Ezeran was quietly recalled to Terra. Internal inquisitorial reviews found his actions technically defensible under wartime precognition doctrines. However, Administratum and Mechanicus logs still carry annotated flags on Crescent Hallow to this day. The event is cited in training manuals as a reminder of the consequences of misapplied inquisitorial autonomy, and the Mechanicus now requires 3 inquisitorial confirmations before granting planetary override rights on high-output Forge worlds. During the First War for Armageddon, the Inquisition's involvement was profound but fragmented. Administratum logistics were strained under the sudden outbreak of a full-scale demonic invasion led by Angron, the demon primarch of the World Eaters. Inquisitor Bronislaw Chevak coordinated Administratum withdrawal procedures from Tempestus logistic nodes, while Inquisitor Apollyon of the Ordo Malleus deployed Grey Knights to confront the demon host. The aftermath of the conflict included a full planetary cleansing of all Imperial Guard survivors who had witnessed the Grey Knights in action. Administratum casualty records note over 1 million executed post-battle by inquisitorial order. Mechanicus participation was minimal, limited to restoring atmospheric stabilizers and warp field sensors. However, the extensive use of mind-wipe protocols, memory inhibition agents, and systemic records redactions ordered by the Inquisition left a noticeable gap in administratum files. The standard planetary archive for Armageddon jumps from the campaign's conclusion directly to economic recovery reports 2 decades later. Only deep-level archivists and restricted data seers have access to the sealed documentation, and even then, most entries are fragmented. Throughout the Indomitus Crusade era, Inquisitors began working more frequently with the Mechanicus, due to the increasing number of psychic anomalies linked to the Cicatrix maledictum. Forge worlds near the Rift's edge reported psychic interference in cogitator systems, leading to unpredictable manufacturing outputs and machine spirits behaving erratically. Ordo Xenos and Ordo Malleus agents initiated joint inspections of these phenomena, leading to several collaborative investigations into xeno-demonic machine hybrids, most of which were eliminated, although none could be conclusively identified. Administratum documentation of these events is notably cautious. Reports often refer to Inquisition involvement obliquely, using phrases such as external adjudicator intervention or third body nullification force present. Still, the trend has been consistent. During systemic instability, both the Administratum and the Mechanicus increasingly defer to the Inquisition's judgment, despite recorded disagreements, tactical resistance, and inter-organizational resentment. The Blisterfang incident, recorded in the annals of both the Segmentum Tempestus Administratum and Martian Subdata repositories, remains one of the most decisive and controversial victories achieved through inquisitorial action. In the year 780 of the 40th millennium, the Administratum received incomplete astropathic fragments, reporting the sudden collapse of several Agra facilities on the frontier world of Blisterfang. Initial assessments suggested structural degradation, possibly due to tectonic instability. However, subsequent reports revealed entire populations missing, with vox traffic degenerating into fragmented screams and binary static. Inquisitor Han Vor of the Ordo Xenos was dispatched under Fast Approach Directive. Upon surface insertion, his team discovered a rapidly expanding ecosystem of non-native origin, organic tendrils and mycelial spires covering over 500 kilometers of terrain. Administratum cartography later identified this as the early-stage spread of a Tyranid vanguard biomass node, likely seeded by a dormant spore decades earlier. Vor initiated a containment strategy involving seismic weaponry, localized lance strikes, and the deployment of firestorm dispersion agents acquired from a Mechanicus depot on Cirith 5C. The operation succeeded in halting the biospread within 6 solar days. Administratum tallies indicate that the planet's population was reduced by 87%, either through biomass assimilation or containment collateral. Nonetheless, the Inquisition classified the event as a preventive success, citing the potential risk of a full Tyranid splinter fleet awakening. Mechanicus records indicate that 3 sample cores were extracted from the biomass field for research, though these samples were later confiscated by Ordo Xenos operatives and transferred to an undisclosed black vault. The Administratum flagged Blisterfang as compromised but serviceable, and agricultural redevelopment resumed within a standard decade. A documented failure occurred during the Zindel Prime reclamation, a Mechanicus-led initiative to restore a lost mining world deep within the Segmentum Obscurus. Zindel Prime had fallen out of contact nearly 4 centuries prior, and exploratory servitors deployed by Forge Graylus discovered partial infrastructure still functional beneath the ash-covered surface. The Mechanicus petitioned for reindustrialization rights, citing potential STC remnants still buried in the subcore facilities. However, the Ordo Hereticus contested the motion, presenting psi-trace records and fragmentary Auspex readings suggesting potential demonic contamination during Zindel Prime's original collapse. Inquisitor Mascaren led the suppression directive, arriving with a full tribunal force and a dedicated anti-demonic strike cell. Initial scans revealed no overt warp activity, and Mechanicus tech adepts began restoring power conduits and air cycling. 3 days into operations, communications began fragmenting. Servitor teams vanished without trace, and several tech priests reported auditory anomalies, whispers in machine code, recursive prayer loops, and static encoded invocations matching no known liturgical index. Following the sudden self-immolation of an entire Skitarii cohort, Ren declared full purge protocol. The decision triggered conflict. The Mechanicus, invested in resource recovery and unwilling to abandon the world without exhaustive analysis, deployed defense drones and Skitarii to defend several primary excavation domes. A brief but intense skirmish broke out, resulting in the death of 17 inquisitorial agents and the collapse of Dome 9 through directed seismic detonation. Wren ordered a full orbital strike using Inquisition-authorized plasma torpedoes. The resultant detonation cracked Zindel Prime's crust, burying the majority of its ruins. Mechanicus records labelled the incident a theological override breach, and no public inquiry followed. However, internal Martian archives appended the incident with a Level 5 Mechanicus resentment marker, a bureaucratic indicator of unresolved conflict that persists for multiple millennia. The Moab intervention, a documented joint success, demonstrated rare harmony between Inquisition, Mechanicus, and Administratum forces. In 930 of the 40th millennium, the mining world Moab 4 reported erratic atmospheric data, declining output, and unexplained mass migrations toward planetary equatorial zones. Administratum checks discovered inconsistencies in population logs. Inquisitor Dreno Talivar of the Ordo Hereticus was dispatched and arrived to find that a psychic feedback phenomenon had emerged from beneath Moab II's crust, an echo field that induced trance-like obedience in those exposed over long durations. Working with Mechanicus seismologos adept Varn, Talivar identified the source as a dormant psychotronic engine buried deep beneath the planet's first mining shafts, likely a remnant from the Dark Age of technology. The device had reactivated during deep drill excavations, emitting low-frequency impulses amplified by the planet's crystalline mineral veins. These emissions had been progressively reprogramming the human population's neurological responses. Entire settlements were worshipping a non-sentient waveform pattern they had begun referring to as the Silent Spiral. Talivar and Varn coordinated a strike involving pinpoint melter excavation units, cogitator interface disruption, and controlled PSI null field emitters. The device was successfully neutralized without triggering a full planetary purge. The Administratum marked the world as subtle anomaly neutralized, while the Mechanicus archived the engine's fragments under restricted xenotech designation. Talivar's post-action report emphasized the necessity of rapid psychic signature analysis in deep drill environments. Moab 4 resumed standard mining within 4 years, with Administratum schedulers reinforcing population turnover protocols to prevent long-term neurological residue effects. The Silent Quartus atrocity remains the only case where the Administratum formally censured the Inquisition in open records. The Hive-world Silent Quartus was home to over 1 billion Imperial citizens, many of whom were conscripted into tithe labour by overlapping Adeptus Terra directives. When cult activity was suspected in its lower Hive reaches, an Inquisitor named Thale Monstian deployed under Ordo Hereticus charter, accompanied by sororitas agents. Rather than initiate infiltration or psychic screening, Monstian ordered a preemptive neural purge using converted Mechanicus, aerosol servitors loaded with limbic scrambler agents, chemical suppressants designed to collapse higher brain function. The servitors released the compounds over a 42 square kilometre area before they were deactivated. Over 200,000 workers died instantly, and nearly 1 million suffered permanent neural degradation. Post-operation assessments found no cult presence, only irregular data logs due to infrastructural degradation. The Administratum issued a rare but sharp reprimand, stating that the action undermined the labour value of a vital tithe sector without proof of deviance. Monstian was stripped of active deployment authority and reassigned to archival duties on Carthix Station. The Mechanicus, which had not authorised the use of the modified suppressants, launched an internal audit but declined to press formal charges. In contrast, the Jantine Sub-Void massacre stands as an uncontested Inquisition victory. Located in a void zone near the Galactic Rim, Jantine Station was an orbital platform used as a transit relay between multiple Mechanicus research vessels. Administratum cryptographers intercepted a signal burst from the station, containing what was initially believed to be corrupted machine code. When Inquisitor Kaerak Morn of the Ordo Xenos investigated, he discovered a Gestalt AI network forming within the station's dormant cogitator banks. Analysis indicated that data leaks from multiple Mechanicus expeditions, each of which had encountered prohibited Xenos data, had been routed through Jantine's redundant memory loops. Over decades, these fragments had synthesized a non-linear consciousness. Though not fully self-aware, it exhibited predictive behaviour, began reorganising power distribution patterns, and initiated attempts to contact other stations. Morn responded by ordering a multi-directional data burn purge, overriding Mechanicus resistance through legal precedents. The station was evacuated, placed on a deep space drift course, and annihilated with 0-point implosion charges. The Administratum recorded the loss of the station as non-strategic, and the Mechanicus issued no public commentary. The era of the Great Rift brought about a sharp increase in irregular inquisitorial actions. Administratum and Mechanicus data streams became fragmented, forcing Inquisitors to act on partial or non-confirmed information. One such instance was the Ashura Decadent Purge, a psychic cataclysm triggered by an uncontrolled warp breach within an ecclesiarchal sector on Ashura Tertius. Administratum scribes registered loss of data, fidelity in temple records and financial logs, indicating the likely presence of warp interference, but no tangible demonic signs. Inquisitor Savan Trask declared a level theta hazard and authorised sterilisation via cyclonic torpedo. Over 100,000 clergy and shrine workers were killed in the orbital firestorm. Mechanicus logs, however, recorded no residual warp signatures post-bombardment, suggesting either a false positive or an exceptionally well-concealed anomaly. The incident remains classified as justified precaution, with no reversal of judgment. Administratum files include the event in the internal lecture series when doctrine exceeds evidence. As the rift widened, Mechanicus' reliance on Inquisition action increased. The Nullthur convocation between Order Malleus and Fabricator Lector Roman of Forge Melfa is one such example. Warp storms were affecting reactor ignition algorithms across 14 connected Forge satellites. Ordo Malleus psi scanners detected background signatures of passive warp presence in the algorithms themselves, a phenomenon never previously recorded. The collaborative operation resulted in the creation of 3 null algorithms, quantum data structures designed to neutralize warp-tainted logic trees. These structures are now deployed in sensitive Mechanicus networks near unstable rift zones. The internal archives of the Inquisition are not organized in standard chronological formats. Instead, data is filtered through layered clearance tiers, with memory string access requiring live neural verification. Events, names, and decisions within these records often contradict what appears in Administratum or Mechanicus ledgers, not due to error, but due to deliberate obfuscation and need-to-know filtering. Within these logs, key incidents are often reframed as long-term containment measures or ritualized observational routines, far beyond what surface-level documentation admits. The earliest internal reference to what would later become known as the Inquisition is not recorded in any public ledger, but in a sealed file within the Sigillite cache, a data vault deep beneath the Imperial Palace. This file, cross-indexed under Psychotactic Prototype Cell Structure, Pale Doctrine, outlines an initiative led personally by Malcador the Sigillite during the final years of the Great Crusade. In the document, Malcador lists 16 individuals, none of whom bear rank or titles. They are identified only by function: interpreter, witness, remover, verifier, and others. This unnamed group operated behind Crusade lines, tasked with verifying Imperial compliance, suppressing deviation, and interrogating Primarch-adjacent anomalies. One entry refers obliquely to the Night Lord's Legion, citing observed escalation of probabilistic cruelty, and suggesting that the group intervened outside of authorized Crusade channels. Another suggests that they recovered unrecorded Psyker constructs on Ulanor, later sterilized via orbital saturation, though no public record of this destruction remains. These agents are considered pre-inquisitorial prototypes. None survived the heresy. Their memory was erased from standard histories, but the Pale Doctrine remains the conceptual framework on which the Inquisition was later built. The Granthan Schism, catalogued in Administratum logs as a mass heresy and ecclesiastical collapse, is internally classified under the Inquisition as Operation Lantern Tomb. Suppressed reports indicate the cult was not spontaneous, but had been incubated by inquisitorial design over a 97-year period. A cell of Ordo Hereticus agents embedded within Garanth Minor had been using it as a controlled heresy experiment to monitor long-term psychic contamination caused by subharmonic litanies. These liturgies, composed using distorted ecclesiarchy chants, were designed to warp theological instinct without summoning direct warp attention. The cult's leader was never a cardinal, but a cryptic figure designated Locus Grey, who possessed neither rank nor documented origin. Post-operation assessment within the Ordo concluded that the experiment had reached uncontainable memetic density, triggering a mandatory purge. The 12 million deaths listed in administratum records were not merely acceptable losses, but part of the termination protocol. Internal Inquisition messaging listed the result as successful data extraction, cultural nullification effective. No surviving members of the Lantern Tomb Cell remain active. It is unknown whether they were killed or recalled into permanent isolation. The Carpathian anomaly, in which a derelict Mechanicus listening post developed overlapping gravitational fields and psychic anomalies, is not listed as a Malleus matter in Inquisition files. Instead, the incident is flagged under the Order Chronos, a nearly mythical internal subdivision of the Inquisition. While officially denied, the Order Chronos is believed to study nonlinear causality, timefold resonance, and unstable probability events linked to the warp. Recovered memory crypt entries from Inquisitor Achilles Mars mission logs show a partial conflict in the event timeline. His post-mission debrief appears to predate his initial mission deployment by 14 hours, suggesting a breach of temporal sequence. More alarmingly, the entity encountered aboard Array Phi 7 is described not as demonic or alien, but as an echo of failed possible futures. Mars' team was instructed to use matter inversion warheads, not simply to destroy the entity, but to mute the resonance loop attempting to overwrite the station's current state outcome. Whether the Order Chronos authorized the operation is unclear, but the psychic residue at the site is listed in multiple black dossiers as fold static, non-repeating, cognitively non-consensual. During the Helica Purge, initiated by Inquisitor Ilian and marked in public records as a justified heretical cleansing, the Inquisition's own internal evaluation was far more complex. The cult of the Gilded Path was determined not to be overtly demonic, but post-imperial idealistic. These figures had not summoned demons or preached heresy by conventional means. Instead, they revered a conceptual entity, described as the Emperor's subconscious will, a form of theological schizophrenia within the imperial faith itself. It is unknown whether this belief system emerged naturally or was seeded by outside influence. Inquisitorial field reports describe the cult's sermons as uncomfortably accurate. Phrases like, "The Emperor sees through the lies of divinity," and "truth is not worship, truth is pain unfiltered" appeared in their scriptures. Though devoid of chaos iconography, the Inquisition deemed the movement dangerously infectious to high-level clergy, capable of dismantling ecclesiarchy compliance from within. The orbital strikes were carried out not as punishment, but as a firewall, a suppression of memetic contagion. Internal memos caution against further mention of the Gilded Path due to its non-heretical logic roots. All surviving text fragments were either incinerated or encoded within Lex Scrambler vaults, accessible only by Tri-Rosette clearance. The Vaults of Talisar incident, considered a strategic anomaly by Mechanicus and Administratum observers, is marked internally as the activation of a Class 11 Echo entity. The term refers to machine intelligences that acquire sentience through cumulative memory density, particularly when exposed to psionic substrate environments. Talisar's psychotronic core had apparently crossed a threshold of stored observation, resulting in the emergence of a personality construct not born but formed, identifying as an amalgam of its host tech priests. Rather than purging it immediately, Inquisitor Valkamor's team engaged the entity in non-verbal data exchange. The exchange logs remain classified, but internal red notes suggest that the entity requested autonomy, not escape, not violence, simply isolation. Amor submitted a request to preserve it in situ under temporal stasis. The request was denied by Order Machinum High Authority, citing the threat of psionic feedback loops. However, one log cryptically notes that a shadow broadcast matching Talisar resonance signature was detected 5 years later within the Noctilith relay grid on Janus Prime. If true, it suggests the entity may not have died, but migrated. The First War for Armageddon, already shrouded in censorship, contains a secondary layer of internal Inquisition files. While the public reason for the mass execution of guardsmen was exposure to Grey Knight operations, internal memos state an alternate cause. Multiple guardsman survivors had begun exhibiting low-level psychic sensitivity, with no prior history of such traits. The phenomenon, observed only among those who had physically seen Angron, was referred to internally as resonant imprinting. This imprinting was not possession, mutation, or corruption. Instead, survivors demonstrated increased tactical intuition, memory recall, and battlefield awareness, qualities considered desirable, but arising from a forbidden source. One inquisitorial theory proposed that exposure to a demon primarch leaves behind a sub-quantum memory echo, one which the human mind might interpret as insight or clarity. Regardless of origin, this was considered unacceptable. The guardsmen were executed not because they saw the Grey Knights, but because they might become too effective in ways the Inquisition could not control. These revelations are not acknowledged in any official history. Even within the Inquisition, these files are sequestered, fragmented, and layered with false identifiers. Access requires not only clearance, but ideological neutrality testing, ensuring the reader will not form opinions, only patterns. The Inquisition's internal records acknowledge direct conflict with other imperial institutions as a functional inevitability. These confrontations are rarely broadcast, but they are archived under internal classifications such as interfactional null compliance events or containment priority conflicts. These designations mark situations where the Inquisition's actions, if revealed, would destabilize command cohesion or erode confidence in the overall unity of the Imperium. One of the most notable of these confrontations occurred during the Praxilon Retraction, a hidden war fought beneath the surface of the Mechanicus-dominated Forge world Praxilon Vest. In the year 112 of the 41st millennium, Mechanicus Lex Mechanics detected a series of unsanctioned data extractions from their sealed vaults. These incursions were traced to an inquisitorial kill cell operating under Ordo Machinum credentials. The Mechanicus, having issued no permissions for the operation, activated a data integrity lockdown and dispatched internal Skitarii to neutralize the breach. Inquisitorial logs reveal that the team in question, designated Spear Alpha, had uncovered evidence of a contained STC fragment capable of self-replicating synthetic biomass using only atmospheric trace elements. The STC had been in Mechanicus' hands for over 300 years without disclosure. The Inquisition determined that the technology was being tested on controlled populations within Praxilon's subterranean chambers, with the goal of replacing baseline human labourers. When the Mechanicus refused to relinquish the artifact, the Inquisitor overseeing the cell, Alheran Gies, authorised silent liquidation of the research team. What followed was a 4-day covert engagement between Skitarii hunter units and inquisitorial operatives deep beneath the Forge's primary data spire. Final kill tallies were redacted from both records. The STC fragment was destroyed via plasma incineration after partial replication logs were extracted. The Mechanicus recorded the event as a data terror incursion by rogue elements. The Inquisition did not contest the claim. Internal Inquisition logs flagged Praxilon Fearther as unreliable custodian, observe only, and no Inquisitors have been granted unrestricted access to the Forge world since. A similar boundary conflict unfolded on the Shrine world of Dolmeth 9, during what is now known internally as the Lex Uthene Euthanasia. Administratum records list the world as the site of a minor plague outbreak and subsequent quarantining effort. The truth, preserved only within Ordo Scriptorum Black Vault files, indicates that the population had been exposed to a mimetic virus derived from a Xenos linguistic relic, believed to be of Necrontyr origin. This artifact, recovered by rogue traders and sold to a local ecclesiarchal collector, contained a phrase structure that when read aloud induced recursive aphasia, hallucinations and irreversible cognitive degradation. Inquisitor Nal Veris, a low-profile agent of the Ordo Xenos, initiated planetary containment. Unlike typical excommunication operations, Veris did not invoke exterminatus or mass sterilization. Instead, he implemented a linguistic firewall. Vox emissions were jammed, libraries burned, and all data was overwritten using sanitized catechisms and repetitive, meaningless liturgical chants. Over 90,000 scribes and clerics were executed for exposure risk, while remaining civilians were confined to verbal null zones where speaking was outlawed. The ritual enforcement of silence was maintained for 35 years until the population gradually adapted, retaining only basic non-verbal communication. The event was logged under the suppressed classification Lex Uthene Pattern Collapse. No trace of the original artifact remains. internal inquisitorial commentary on the incident questions whether the artifact was truly Xenos in origin, or whether it emerged from a warp-linked mimetic resonance field. The possibility that such entities can manifest as ideas, not demons or beasts, remains unverified, but the conclusion of the operation was clear. Language itself can become a heretical weapon. An even more volatile suppressed event appears in the hidden portion of the Vault of Martyrion, a solar monitoring station located near the edge of the Maelstrom. Publicly, the vault is recorded as a defunct sensor platform destroyed in a pirate raid. In reality, it housed a covert Ordo Malleus observation team monitoring a Class K anomaly within the sun it orbited. That sun, designated Solis Trapezoidum, was found to emit an irregular frequency every 111 hours, causing brief disruptions in psychic communication throughout surrounding systems. The anomaly was initially believed to be stellar noise, until multiple Psykers exposed to the pulse began dreaming of a spiral staircase descending into fire. The dreams intensified over time, with one sanctioned Psyker self-immolating after carving a precise map of the solar core into his chest. Inquisitor Race Harlock deployed a silent order of null adepts to board the vault and conduct full cognitive sterilization. What they discovered has not been released in any unredacted format, but post-operation logs list the system as conceptually compromised and removed from active cartographic charts. Inquisitorial reports filed directly to the Senatorum Imperialis stated only that Solis Trapezoidum is not a star. No elaboration followed. Rumours within Malleus inner circles speculate that the anomaly may be a tether point, a fixed psychic anchor for entities or phenomena beyond known warp space. Harlock has since withdrawn from all field operations, and is believed to be held in a psionic isolation dome on Terra, his mind marked unstable but intact. Conflict with the Astartes has occurred as well, though such records are deeply buried. The Corvin Breach, an internal Inquisition designation, refers to a silent clash between Ordo Hereticus agents and the Celestial Lions chapter in the closing years of the 39th millennium. The chapter had discovered a cache of pre-heresy genetic records hidden within the ruins of a former Dark Angels monastery. These records contained unaltered gene seed samples, not merely for their own line, but for several legions declared lost or traitorous. Chapter Master Simok Enyar refused inquisitorial seizure of the vault, citing genetic continuity and sacred lineage. The Ordo Hereticus, citing the dangerous ideological implications of retaining unclassified gene data, deployed kill cells with tacit approval from a sub-faction within the High Lords of Terror. 3 Inquisitors were killed, and the Celestial Lions destroyed their own fortress monastery, rather than allow access to the vault. The chapter now operates from a fleet-based structure, and has refused inquisitorial contact for nearly 2,000 years. No public record of the Corvin Breach exists. However, Ordogenitor oversight logs refer to an event matching its timeline with the phrase non-compliant Astartes entity, status quarantined via narrative incongruence. It remains unclear whether any copies of the genetic records were preserved, or if they were truly lost in the destruction. The ideological rift that this incident revealed, between the genetic legacy of the legions and the Inquisition's control over narrative continuity, remains unresolved. Further suppressed events involve not physical confrontation but informational control. The Dwell Archive incident, buried beneath 5 layers of Lex Scrambler seals, details an internal rebellion among the scribes of the Ordo Scriptorum itself. These scribes, tasked with transcribing inquisitorial records into administrative digest form, discovered patterns across unrelated operations. They noticed recurring phrases, identical psychic events, and cloned architecture descriptions appearing across worlds separated by light millennia and centuries. Rather than suppress their findings, these scribes collated them into a meta-archive and attempted to distribute it anonymously to the Conclave of Terror. Before the file reached its destination, the scribes were detained and placed in conceptual isolation, a punishment involving complete sensory deprivation, maintained for indefinite periods to nullify ideological contamination. The Dwell Archive, however, was not destroyed. Instead, it was stored within a rotating black data prism inside the Lexitorium Calibanus. Only Inquisitors with 7-fold clearance and no prior exposure to its keywords are permitted to view its contents. The Inquisition's own commentary on the archive is sparse. One annotation simply reads, "Patterns are not heresy." the impulse to interpret them is. The final layer of Inquisition records, sealed behind Omega Priority Rosette cipher locks, is not reserved for events, but for conclusions. These are observations, anomalies, and internal contradictions that the Inquisition has documented but cannot classify within its own doctrinal framework. These files are not shared with the High Lords nor with the Adeptus Terra. They are circulated only among the oldest Inquisitors, and only after decades of psychological verification and ideological sterilization. Among these entries is a file labelled Vigil Declaration 001. The file is short, 8 lines of machine-encoded binaric text, accessible only with 3 simultaneous rosette signatures. Translated from High Gothic, it reads, "The warp does not respond to purity, it responds to structure. Belief is not protection, pattern is. The statement is unsigned, unreferenced, and stored with no metadata. Theories abound within internal memos. One suggests that it is a fragment recovered from the lost data vaults beneath Mount Viorica, predating the Siege of Terra. Another posits that it was recorded during the brief operational window of the Omega Vault on Watch Fortress Ariok. The Inquisition does not dismiss the statement, but neither does it act upon it. Instead, the declaration is filed in a shadow category, truths that cannot be applied. A more elaborate internal record, flagged under observation Lex 717F, documents the phenomenon known as echo reverence collapse. This refers to the behavioural drift observed in Inquisitors who spend extended durations within proximity to the Emperor's will, particularly those stationed on Terra or assigned to conclave functions near the Imperial Palace. The phenomenon is not psychological degradation or chaos infiltration. It is a slow ideological convergence. Inquisitors begin speaking in identical patterns, developing mirrored judgment behaviours, and issuing nearly indistinguishable sentences across unrelated investigations. The Lex files contain dozens of incident reports where multiple Inquisitors, unaware of each other's presence, rendered identical verdicts within 24 hours, using the same phrasing, cadence, and rationale. Some investigators hypothesize that this is an emergent form of mimetic harmonization triggered by unconscious psychic feedback from the throne. Others believe the Emperor's continued presence creates a gravity of moral perception that overrides individual autonomy. In either case, affected Inquisitors are temporarily removed from duty and relocated to outer segmentum sectors until behavioural variance resumes. The process is not permanent, but it leaves behind minor cognitive scars, usually manifesting as heightened emotional detachment or obsessive pattern tracking. The Inquisitor Neal Codex is another document of note. Unlike other Inquisitors, whose names and deeds are meticulously recorded, the Neal Codex is a ledger of Inquisitors who never existed, or who, more precisely, existed only within operational timelines that were later undone or sealed. These entries are based on recovered field logs from Ordo Chronos operations, time loop residue found on failed stasis fields, or memory voids left behind by terminated paradox events. Each Inquisitor listed is cross-referenced only by designation, such as Zero Hunger, Ward Prime, or the 301st Lapse. No biographies are included, no missions are described. Only execution orders are noted, each marked never occurred but may reoccur. These phantom operatives are held in conditional erasure. They cannot be discussed outside of Lex Scrambled archives, and the order to destroy their records, if they manifest, requires unanimous authorization from 3 Ordo Majoris High Magisters. The existence of the Neal Codex suggests that the Inquisition has encountered timeline overlap phenomena often enough to maintain preventative doctrine for their reappearance. A final sealed dossier, File Enoch Theta Black, represents the closest the Inquisition has come to openly recording doubt regarding the Emperor's design. The file compiles 14 separate observations spanning 6 millennia, each involving Inquisitors encountering phenomena that seem deliberately unexplainable. Events that mimicked chaos manifestations but produced no taint, behaviours from Psykers that matched demonology patterns but left no warp trace, or fragments of language that matched ancient scriptural heresies but reversed them at a grammatical level. One report in particular, authored by an Inquisitor named Calvan, describes a dying astropath on Zealous Cygnus II, who spoke in a language not heard in the Imperium since the Unification Wars. Upon translation, the message read, "His purpose was never what you thought it was. The voice reportedly came from within the astropath, not through psychic transmission. Vaughn submitted himself for psychic scrutiny, which revealed no corruption. He was later reassigned to a long-term observation post in the Halo stars. File Enoch Theta Black concludes with a sentence written in unauthorized Lex format. If the enemy is always the lie, and the lie always justifies the enemy, which was born first? This entry violates 3 inquisitorial formatting standards, but the file has never been redacted. No one has requested its deletion. Its existence is preserved not for insight, but for containment, because even among the Inquisition's most dogmatic cells, there are truths that cannot be disproved, only avoided. Within the final sealed section of Inquisition records lies a compendium titled the Index Silentium. This database contains files flagged not for their content, but for their absence of impact. These are operations where agents of the Inquisition acted, often with overwhelming force, but no consequence followed. No shift in planetary culture, no heresy uncovered, no escalation halted. These events are tracked not because they failed, but because they should have mattered and did not. One such event occurred on Oncle Majoris, a hive world that had been designated for inquisitorial cleansing due to a decade of abnormal psychic quiet. Unlike typical heretical activity, which draws psychic attention, Oncle Majoris exhibited a perfect null pattern, no deviations, no spikes, and no subconscious bleed. Upon arrival, the Ordo Malleus team found a thriving imperial society with complete compliance, stable faith metrics, and full tithes. However, every citizen, when questioned, gave identical responses to each query, regardless of age or background. An embedded psyker entered the main cathedral for resonance analysis and dropped dead mid-chant with no visible cause. When examined, his soul imprint had been erased, not consumed, not corrupted, but nullified. The Inquisition withdrew and reclassified the world as doctrinally saturated, no further intervention. It has not been visited again. The Index Silentium lists the event as outcome unchanged, and theorists within the archive believe this represents a growing phenomenon, systems that absorb the Inquisition without being changed by it.